Hi everyone, welcome to the Pearls of Wisdom. Today, very excited to talk to Dr. Mary Wyatt about the challenge of developing mentally healthy workplaces and the implications for people who are injured at work within those workplaces. Dr. Wyatt's an occupational physician and specialist in work health and work injuries. She's worked extensively with complex claims across a range of industries and participates in extensive research and return to work. Dr. Wyatt's a strong advocate for better work injury management systems and is working with and advises work injury management schemes for regulators and government in this space. So your research, Dr. Wyatt, indicates that the workplace's approach is a key influence on return to work outcomes and that they have a major influence over health, wellbeing and productivity of their staff. So obviously it's very important to have a mentally healthy workplace to prevent those secondary psych injuries developing for people that have a physical injury. So, from your research, we can see you're well credentialed to talk in this space, and we feel very privileged to have you here today. So to share your pearls of wisdom with us on this topic. So I guess overall, just looking at mental health, we know it's a major issue for us as a culture overall and as a country. A fifth of Aussies are experiencing mental health conditions, and no doubt, the recent sort of COVID situation has had a significant impact on that. But 3/4 say mental health is actually a significant issue when they look to choose an employer, for example. So, if employers want to get and retain good staff, then having a mentally healthy workplace will obviously be an imperative for that. PwC research shows that the return of investment is $2.30 for every dollar that's spent. So certainly the fiscal, indications are there and support employers doing it. I mean, obviously it's also about developing a culture and having a positive, happy workplace, which is obviously important to the people that work there. So we know that mental health claims cost probably 2.5 times more than physical claims, and have people with mental health injuries have 2.5 times more time off work. So, it certainly has a significant impact on people. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that and why that develops and why the mental health culture of a workplace is so important to injured workers.
Well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this, Danielle. It's such an important issue for workers and for workplaces. My area is post-work injury, and what we know is that how an organisation deals with a work injury or return to work is really a microcosm of how they generally deal with the workplace and the workplace culture. Good research show there's one tool to measure workplace culture, the psychosocial safety climate, and that has good correlation with the extent of time off work and claims costs following a work injury. And that's one objective measure of the influence of the workplace on return to work. More direct measures, we know that when workers or employees with an injury say that their employer has responded constructively following their report of injury, they're way more likely to be back at work than if they feel they've had a negative response from the workplace. So that initial response makes a big difference, and that initial response is a reflection generally of how workplaces continue to respond. The workplace is probably the greatest influence on return to work, and that impacts both the well-being of the worker and the well-being of the workplace, both in terms of the culture and of the finances, as you've talked about. Work cover premiums, the direct costs reflect very much the workplace attitude and the workplace approach, and those claims costs will also have a direct impact on the premium, and the indirect costs, staff replacement, casual staff to perhaps fill somebody's position, onboarding costs, etc., the time taken for supervisors and return to work coordinators in HR, those indirect costs are estimated to be 4 to 10 times the direct premium costs. So a lot of potential savings for workplaces and potential improvements in people's well-being when workplaces get it right.
Mary, has any of your research been about how do employers take on that sort of information that you've just talked about? Or how do you get employers to take on that information to make the changes necessary to create that positive environment?
Yeah, there's not a lot of research about how you influence workplaces to become more proactive.
Okay.
We know that when they get their work cover premium notice, and particularly when there's been a significant increase, their interest is piqued. And I know from talking with senior managers, when you talk about the well-being of their workplace and the well-being of their workers, they're interested. But when you talk about the financial savings, their interests are often even more piqued because obviously, you know, that's one of their key performance matters is the financial bottom line. And of course, as you said, it's beyond work injuries, you know, absenteeism, staff turnover, productivity, all of those things are significantly improved when there's a good workplace culture. I repeatedly talk about reciprocity. Reciprocity is that notion that we respond in kind, the thing your mum taught you, you know, do unto others.
Yes.
Reciprocity has been studied across societies and across history, and it's a fundamental operating principles of human beings. So you look after me, I am way more likely to look after you. You treat me badly and I don't trust you, I'm going to respond in kind. And both positive reciprocity and that negative reciprocity are increased. So you do something for me, I'm more likely to do something nice back for you, but I'll increase the level of it. Treat me badly, I'll probably increase my level of negative response to you. And this is just the way we are as human beings. Nothing about unusual about workers. We're all that way. And it's just a fundamental operating principle. If we look after each other, we'll do better.
I often, in workers that I've talked to about this issue, you know, I often call it that upward spiral or the downward spiral. So you can, if the employer starts doing the right thing, the worker will build on that, the employer will build on that, and you go upwards. But you have the reverse, the negative. Employer does something that the worker perceives is inappropriate or dishonest or shady or whatever, and they don't trust them, and so then they don't. Then they're not as compliant or easy to get along with, and then the employer doesn't trust, and it just goes the other way. So
absolutely, and it's often that worker that we did a webinar yesterday, and one of the highly experienced case managers would ask the supervisor, where would you rate your worker on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, and get a sense of the relationship and what the supervisor's view is.
Yes.
And, you know, low view of the worker, then that's a red flag for problems. And often, and you've seen this many times over, and I have as well, the worker's not the best performer in the workplace. The supervisor feels justified in giving them a bit of a hard time or perhaps having a bit of a negative response, and as you say, it's viral. Yeah.
Yes. So with the research that you've done, what are the common mental health conditions that injured workers develop from workplaces where it's not a positive culture to return to work?
Yeah, look, I might focus on secondary psychological problems. As an occupational physician, mostly I deal with physical injuries, shoulders, backs, necks, knees, etc., and a range of other health issues. And what we do know is that when people with a physical problem develop secondary mental health, anxiety or depression or the typical adjustment disorder, they actually do worse than people with a primary mental ill health problem. So prevention is better than cure, as you would say, Danielle. And the important situation is to prevent people developing those secondary mental health problems. And I would also add in there chronic pain. If you think, I mean, the simple way of thinking about chronic pain is acute pain plus distress makes you much more likely to develop a chronic pain disorder. And if you can prevent that distress, you can minimise the chance of chronic pain. I was involved with an intervention 15 years ago where we worked with medium to large employers, a large number of cases, and we had day one model of early care, and we got in and helped people. It was a very supportive model and maintained that employee-employer relationship, influenced supervisors to look after people. And we didn't have any cases where people develop chronic pain, and this is out of thousands of cases. And I would attribute that to minimising distress.
Yep. It really gets back to that brain-body link, doesn't it? That is there and becoming more accepted is there, and the interplay with that in the development of chronic pain. Yes,
absolutely. And so you can not only minimise the chance of people developing chronic pain, but minimise the chance of developing anxiety and depression. Now, the WISE study, for those of you who haven't heard of it, was a major study in New South Wales public hospitals. And the model for the WISE study, and I'm happy to provide you with references.
Sure, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, was to do psychosocial screening on all people with their physical injuries within the intervention public hospitals. So people would get a shoulder problem or a back problem, and they'd be screened using the short form Arebro pain musculoskeletal questionnaire. Those at high risk were given extra support. First thing, they were offered extra support by a psychologist who was trained in management of psychosocial factors, and they had their return to work coordinator provide extra visits. They saw an injury management consultant in New South Wales at 6 weeks if they were still off work. And so they had that extra support, and they had a significant reduction in work disability in those cases. And there were control hospitals where people had usual care. And this really was a award-winning study and pretty good evidence that you can get in early and identify people who are at risk of prolonged work disability. Extra early studies from WorkCover Queensland and the Recovery Blueprint show that the major factors affecting work disability for physical claims are, firstly, low coping ability, and secondly, workplace issues. So if you give those people extra support and manage the workplace, then you're halfway there to helping them and reducing long-term work disability. So they had significant reduction in work disability, days lost from work, but more importantly, at 10 to 12 months post-injury, a huge reduction in long-term cases. So it'll slightly increase costs in the early stages, but longer term will be a massive reduction in disability for the worker and all of those awful consequences, and also significant financial savings.
So it seems that from what the research is showing, what you're suggesting is that providing that early individualized support for the person and making sure they feel, connected and heard and validated really will lead to better outcomes for employers.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
which is the same sort of thing that we talk about in creating, overall a mentally healthy workplace environment. That's what employees need. So they go hand in hand, don't they?
Absolutely. And the research on how you actually manage psychological cases is not well formed. We can gather from indirect reviewing of the literature how we should approach it, but the basic principles are to treat physical injury cases and psychological injury cases in the same way. You can do psychological screening and identify psychosocial factors in those who've lodged psychological injury claims or have psychological injuries with or without a claim. And the same principle applies. You get in early, you speak to the worker, often supervisors are worried and cautious and avoid communicating with their team members because they're kind of fearful they might muck it up, or I don't understand, what do I do? But when they get in with the same approach for psychological cases to physical injury cases, things work much more smoothly. Make a diagnosis, discuss return to work, what does the worker need in terms of return to work duties, communicate, look after them. Same principles apply.
So just then in wrapping up, Dr. Wyatt, I mean, there's so much to take from that. Thank you. Are there any additional recommendations that you would like to make that you think important for employers, what they can do to create that positive sort of culture and environment so that, you know, people that do have the physical injuries, it doesn't translate to the secondary mental health injuries?
There's a lot of information around at the moment about what employers can and need to do, not only to create a really good environment, but also to meet their obligations.
Yeah.
The psychosocial hazards way of looking at this issue is coming, or it has come. It's out from Safe Work Australia. Jurisdictions are picking it up. There are safety inspectors now looking at how workplaces are dealing with psychosocial hazards. So there's a lot of information out there. I don't think I need to repeat it, but it's a matter of going through it. It's not a difficult thing to do, but it does take time and effort. And I would commend workplaces to look around at workplaces that have done it. A particular thing I like is Netflix's HR policy, which is no high-performing jerks. And, you know, the high performer who is a problem in terms of team members is a really big issue, because companies rely on them because they get stuff done, but at the same time they're doing a great job individually. They can be very destructive if they are that have that sort of bullying or whatever approach that affects team members. So I would encourage workplaces to deal with those issues proactively. We hear about them all the time. It's hard for workplaces to deal with it, but really important. And the best way to deal with those is to set up an overall good culture and deal with those difficult team members as part of that overall culture.
Well, thank you. That's fantastic advice. Thank you, Dr. Wyatt. Really appreciate your time. It's been lovely to interview you. You can talk about this probably all day long. There's so much drilling down you could do in specific areas. But thank you so much for that. Really appreciate your time and love to chat with you again at some point.
Delightful. Thanks again, Danielle.
Take care. Thank you for your time. Bye.